When we think of the Wild West, we picture dusty streets, shootouts at high noon, and bandits robbing trains. But the reality? It was a place of survival where every day was a struggle against not just the elements, but other people. The legends of gunslingers and outlaws capture only part of the story. This was a land of brutal justice, where sheriffs and outlaws alike lived by the gun. Let's strip away the myths and see what life in the Wild West was really like. Life in the Wild West was more than just shootouts and saloons. It was tough. Settlers faced harsh conditions, and survival wasn't guaranteed. You had scorching summers, freezing winters, and everything from droughts to blizzards. Most towns didn't have much in the way of comforts. Imagine living in a small wooden shack with no electricity, running water, or even proper sanitation. Diseases spread easily, and medical help was often hours or even days away. The image of the cowboy as a fearless gunslinger is only part of the story. In reality, most cowboys were young men working exhausting, low-paying jobs herding cattle. Days were long, stretching from sunup to sundown, and the work was grueling. Cowboys weren't battling bandits at every turn. Their real enemies were the landscape, extreme weather, and sometimes even the cattle they managed. Sharpshooter accuracy, something movies or video games love to show off, was more fantasy than fact. Cowboys weren't quick-draw experts looking for jewels. They used their guns to protect the herd, fend off predators, or put down sick animals. Aiming from horseback wasn't easy either, making movie-style accuracy near impossible in real life. For most, the day-to-day grind didn't involve glamorous showdowns, but hard work under a blazing sun, harsh rains, and freezing nights. Now, about those sheriffs and outlaws. In truth, the line between lawman and outlaw wasn't always clear. Many sheriffs had criminal backgrounds, or at the very least were known for bending the rules. Law enforcement was often brutal because it had to be. In some towns, sheriffs had to enforce the law with just a handful of deputies, sometimes even facing down entire gangs. Notorious outlaws like Jesse James or Billy the Kid are famous today. Most towns weren't in a constant state of shootouts and robberies. Life was rough, but people still went about their daily business. However, justice could be quick and ruthless. Vigilante justice was common, especially in places with weak or no formal law. Some towns relied on citizens' committees or local militias to take matters into their own hands, and the punishment for crimes, whether you were guilty or not, could be harsh, often involving public hangings. There were also the so-called circuit judges, who would travel from town to town to hold trials. But given the limited resources, cases could be decided based on little more than public opinion. Sometimes, people who were accused of crimes didn't even get a trial, and rumors alone could get a person thrown into jail or worse. Let's talk about the legendary heists that have shaped the image of the Wild West. While they make for exciting stories, train and stagecoach robberies were actually less common, but when they did happen, they captured everyone's attention. Outlaws like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid were known for their daring train robberies. These heists were meticulously planned, often involving multiple gang members and getaway horses strategically placed along the route. The targets? Typically cash, gold, or valuables being transported across the expanding frontier. Stagecoach robberies, though less lucrative, were also popular with bandits who could easily ambush the smaller, slower-moving wagons traveling through secluded routes. The most infamous robberies were so daring, they became legends. Newspapers eagerly reported these heists, sensationalizing them for a public fascinated by tales of the Wild West. While tales of gold rushes and fortunes defined the Wild West in popular culture, the financial reality was far more brutal. Many people flocked west, chasing dreams of striking it rich, especially during the California Gold Rush in 1849 and later the Klondike Gold Rush. Yet for most, these dreams led only to disappointment. Many hopeful miners spent years working grueling hours in dangerous conditions, only to walk away empty-handed or, worse, in debt. Aside from gold and silver, the economy in the West revolved around livestock, farming, and trade. Cattle ranchers could make a decent living, but they had to contend with droughts, cattle rustlers, and fluctuating prices. As for the average settler, money was often scarce, with most surviving off what they could grow, hunt, or trade. The cost of living was high, supplies were limited, and merchants often charged steep prices for basic goods. In short, wealth was rare, and most lived hand to mouth, eking out a living through hard work and persistence. Now, let's imagine for a moment you were right there in the Wild West, living day to day. Life back then was harsh enough that many of us wouldn't have made it. Everything was a test of survival, from finding safe water to getting through a meal without dust in it. If you weren't up against the brutal weather or a potential attack, you were up against illness. Forget about hospitals or pharmacies. A minor infection could turn deadly in no time. Most towns were just small clusters of cabins, saloons, maybe a schoolhouse, and they were often cut off from supplies and support. Resources were scarce, and survival meant knowing how to make do with very little. If you ran a farm, you had to wrestle with rocky soil, drought, or freezing winters. And for those on cattle drives or in mining camps, the dangers were even greater. Even a simple trip was risky. A wrong move on a stagecoach or wagon meant exposure to thieves, rugged landscapes, and sometimes days without food or water. The reality is, the Wild West was less about high noon shootouts and more about enduring daily hardships just to see another day. It was a life where survival itself was the real victory.